We want to talk about ferrule finishing and sizing ferrules to the proper size, and I've got a 6-iron here. And the ferrule's been installed, the club's been assembled, and we have an edge with a ferrule a bit larger than the outside diameter of the hosel, and we want to size that down to the same size. And then we'll bring it to a shine using tone. It can be done by hand as well, but we're going to show you today using the sanding machine. We've installed a cloth, cotton, linen belt. I've drawn an arrow on the belt to show the direction that the belt turns. That's important. There is a certain way that the club has to rotate into the belt for this to properly cut the plastic. If it doesn't rotate in the correct direction, it'll just kind of gum up and make a mess out of the ferrule. It won't create a cutting action. We've got our belt or sander here set up with a ferrule turning arm that's mounted to the post. We try to keep that arm down as close as we can so that we're just above this metal piece behind the belt. This metal piece is called a platen, and by staying closer to the belt, it keeps the belt flat. If we got higher up on the belt, the edges will tend to cup in, and it may not keep our ferrule sharp and clean or straight all the way across the ferrule. We set the club in the machine. In this case, we just have an iron with a steel shaft, and I at the moment just have the belt hanging toe down. When I start, and if I explain the machine as a right-hand setup, which I will here since that's the way we're hanging the club head to the right-hand side. If I stood on the right-hand side of the machine, the belt is turning in a counterclockwise fashion, and we have to turn the club head at that point in a counterclockwise fashion to get this to properly cut the ferrule. So as we're starting with the club hanging toe down in this right-handed setup, the first direction has to be turning to the back, turn the club head or the toe of the club to the back of the machine, or so that the club head, the shaft or the ferrule is turning up into the direction the belt is turning. That's where the cutting action comes from. I like to control the club on the stand with my left hand, just the crease of my hand here against it, and then keep my thumb and index finger on the shaft so that I can move the club on and off the belt. It's important to be able to do that. If all of a sudden you stop the rotation of the club and the belt continues to turn, you're going to sand or go right through the ferrule or definitely put a flat side on it. So it's important that we keep this thing moving anytime it's on the belt and the belt is moving. We can put good pressure back against the belt. Most ferrules today are sized fairly close to size to the outside diameter of the hosel, so we should not have to do a lot of rotations or a lot of sizing in this case. I was always taught to use my fingertips to rotate the club as I press it against the belt. Some people prefer to put it in the palm of their hand, whichever one is most comfortable for you and allows you to keep the club moving in a nice consistent pace. If you do happen to get a ferrule that has a little bit more material to remove, be aware the club's going to want to turn a little faster from this toe up to toe down position simply on its own because of the weight of the head. So you have to develop a rhythm if there's more materials to keep the club moving at an even pace when you do this. It's a good idea as well to practice. If you haven't done it with a machine before, just set it up like this. Put the club on here. Just practice taking the club on and off the belt and rotating it without ever turning the machine on at this point. Once we turn it on, we're going to press back against it. We shouldn't have to make too many rotations to take this particular ferrule down to size. The cloth linen belt in the case of this stainless steel iron, or even a chrome plated iron, and a steel shaft. In this case, we don't have to worry about either of those finishes. We're not going to do any damage to those. So now I'm going to put my safety glasses on, turn the machine on, and turn this ferrule down to size. Basically like that. I can inspect it. If I don't think it's quite right, I can put it back on. If I haven't done too much, I can always go back and take a little bit more. I always say be a little bit aware of the greed factor, trying to just get it absolutely perfect and end up going beyond. At this point, we would then take some acetone and a paper towel and just get a nice clean wet edge. And we're going to wipe this very lightly, very quickly to put a shine on our ferrule. I prefer just to hold the club up like this, wipe in this direction again, very lightly, very quickly, very light pressure. When I do that, I'm actually wiping behind my finger here on the towel, not actually with the point of my finger, because that would actually be too much pressure. And now I've got a very good size and I've got a good shine besides. If you're doing a graphite shaft, I've got a graphite shaft here with a metalwood head on it. You can see the little ring right here, that's somewhat left there for ferrule finishing, so that when we put it on the machine, we've got some room for the edge of the belt so that it's not hitting the painted surface. If you felt it necessary, you could put a piece of tape in there. Be aware paint doesn't bond as well to titanium surfaces, and at times you may take the tape off and take paint off in that regard. When we're doing a graphite shaft, it's best to put a piece of tape on the shaft to protect the coating on the shaft. The belt, being just a linen belt, cotton linen belt, shouldn't damage the shaft, but it could wear through the finish that's on the shaft, the coating on the shaft as well. From there, the process remains exactly the same. We hold it, we rotate it against the belt and turn it. And again, I'll turn this one on and take this down to size as well. And then at that point, I can go ahead again with a paper towel, acetone, just as I did with the iron, wipe it and bring it to a shine. Okay, we want to talk about ferrule finishing, and this time we're going to talk about and explain how to finish this ferrule for size, doing it by hand with just some sandpaper, a little bit of steel wool, and some acetone to bring this back to a shine. And again, ferrules will generally always be a little bit larger in diameter than the top of the hosel, and then they can be sized down to fit. A rule of thumb we like to use is a fingernail. We don't like to be able to catch an edge when it's finished properly. With what we're going to do by hand, that might be a case where there's a little bit of an edge, but we're going to show you how to work that out. I'm going to take some masking tape and I'm going to put some tape on the shaft, and I can wrap this around a couple times if I'd like. I could even go up a little farther if I want to be overly cautious about not slipping and sanding the shaft. And then I'm going to put a piece right below the bottom edge of the ferrule on the club head side. This piece, however, I want to wrap one time around with just a very slight overlap. The tape itself is about 10,000 thickness, which would leave a little bit of an edge when we get all said and done, but we have a way with using acetone that we can soften that edge so that we don't feel that or notice that as much. Then I take the club and I'm just going to clamp it in the vise, and I generally start toe down. And I've taken a strip of 150 grit cloth back sandpaper here. I try to tear it to a width that's basically about the width of the ferrule. The only edge we have to sand down is this edge down here by the club head. This upper edge has already been finished, so we really don't need to worry about sanding that too much. That's why we don't generally need to tape any farther up the shaft than this. And I'm just simply going to start with a shoe shine method of sanding, trying again to keep the sandpaper on the ferrule and not on the club head. We don't want to sand through this tape and end up sanding or scratching through the club head with scratch marks. Just as I go, rotate this around and continue to sand. Another product I've used to sand ferrules by hand is actually what's called drywall screen, which can be used for sanding drywall. It's porous. It looks like the screen from a screen door, and you can just cut it into strips and do the same thing. It actually works pretty well because it doesn't clog up quite like the sandpaper will when you do this, and it seems to stay working well a little bit longer. But I just continue to go around this until I get it sized, just running my finger to make sure I'm not leaving an edge, or that I'm smoothing that edge to that tape. And again, being cautious not to sand through it. If I need to, if it starts to get where it's not sanding real well, I can switch to another clean piece, which I'm going to do here. Emery cloth would be another thing that could work well here for sanding these down. I know some people that have done it that way as well. And as I always say, as you do this, just don't get to a point where you get greedy trying to get it just too perfect. We're going to pretty much let the acetone do that. Just a little bit on this side. That's pretty good. That doesn't feel too bad there. So we end up with a ferrule that we sanded down, and it's going to now have scratches in it. When this ferrule is finished and done the way we want it to look, it's not going to have any scratches in it. It's going to be, if you will, a high polished mirror finish. Now, With an iron like this with a steel shaft and a head that I don't have to worry about doing any damage to, I can go ahead and take this tape off of here. If I were working with a graphite shaft, I might leave this tape on here, and again, I might tape it up even a little bit further. But in the case of a steel shaft, there's nothing that acetone, or what I'm going to do from this point on out, is going to hurt with this particular shaft. Now, I said there'd be a little bit of an edge because of the thickness of the tape. Okay? One of the things I do next, I'm going to take some acetone, and what acetone really does is this ferrule, acetone will melt this. This ferrule's plastic, and acetone will melt plastic. And we're basically going to melt the scratches out of this. I'm going to get a wet edge, and I like to hold the club from the head end this way, and then wipe this way, and I'm putting good pressure when I wipe. If I wipe this direction, I wipe against the edge that was left from the thickness of the tape, and it will soften that edge or even put a radius to it. In this case, I'm not real worried about getting a shine. I'm trying to melt out the scratches. I'm melting plastic. And be careful that you don't let this get too dry, or you'll end up with pieces of paper towel in your ferrule. After I get it down to a certain point, I like to take some fine steel wool, either 0.000 or 4/0 steel wool, and then rub this out very carefully. The other thing that wiping with steel wool does, if there's a lip from the ferrule when you do your club assembly, it can be difficult to wipe all the excess epoxy, and you might end up with a film of epoxy underneath that edge of that ferrule. The steel wool will take that film of epoxy out of there for you. It smooths the ferrule out so you can get a better look at it. Look at it smooth, pretty much how well did I get my scratches out. And then at that point, clean it all up, get another clean wet edge with acetone on a paper towel, and this time I'm going to wipe very quickly, very lightly with very light pressure, because now I'm trying to make it shine. Okay? And now I've got a ferrule that's got shine to it. It looks that my scratches are gone. If I still have scratches in it at this point, the shine that I've put to this ferrule are just going to magnify the scratches. So if I still see scratches in it at this point in time, just give it some time for the acetone to evaporate, which it evaporates very quickly. Take some steel wool again, rub it out again to smooth it out, and then take a nice clean wet edge of acetone, and again, very quickly, very light pressure. When I wipe with this towel, I have my finger on the towel. I'm actually wiping in behind my finger. I'm not wiping with my finger. Some of the guys that work for us here in the shop will actually take the towel and fold it and wet an edge and actually just brush it like a brush. That's another way to use it, and it's another way to show just how light the pressure we want to have when we do this. But it's also very important to have a very wet edge with acetone as well. Okay?